Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode and all of our Ivory Tower Boiler Room episodes ad free? Head to our Patreon, patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room for $5 a month. You get all of our ad free episodes, our video interviews, and our bonus episodes. See you there.
Well, I think what happened in every book actually up until My Policeman was I had started with a real story. So I started with some facts, you know.
Hi, this is Andrew. When I'm not here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, sometimes I'm actually invited to be on other podcasts as a guest. Well, there is one podcast run by Christian Garcia and his co-host Nate that I absolutely love. It is called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. So calling all you classic cinema fans out there and those who love queer theme cinema, which I think there's a lot of you who are listening right now where you've perked up. So follow them on Instagram at that OL Gay Classic Cinema. The first ever episode I was featured as a guest. It's The Sound of Music. I got to talk about being Captain Von Trapp in high school, and it's just such an exciting conversation. They've also featured discussions about Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, which features guests from the podcast The Garland Gab and Down the Yellow Brick Pod. There's a deep dive of Cinderella, and recently they had an episode on the film Giants starring Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean. And actually, one of the guests, Lauren Randall, I know from Stony Brook University's PhD English department. So shout out, Lauren. You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. It's definitely such a great listen. So why not listen to it after you listen to this current episode on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room? Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I am so excited to be joined with a guest who I've known a lot about before this interview was booked, but actually, one of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room interns, Andrea, made the first connection to Bethan on Instagram, and Bethan responded. So, thanks to Andrea for setting this up for us. But Bethan Roberts, I want to just read a little bit about Bethan. Who is she? Um, she's published 5 novels. She writes short fiction and drama for BBC Radio 4. Her other novels include, her main, I won't call it the main novel, but the novel we're going to chat about is My Policeman. Um, but her other novels include The Good Plain Cook, which was a BBC Radio 4 book at bedtime, Mother Island, which received a Jerwood Fiction Uncovered Prize, and this one I need to read next, Graceland, which tells the story of Elvis Presley and his mother Gladys. She also writes short fiction. She's won the Society of Authors Olive Cook Award and the Royal Academy and Pindrop Short Story Award. She has taught creative writing at Chichester University and Goldsmiths College London, and she lives in Brighton with her family. So she is at the shore, the seashore.
Yeah, I am right
And
on it.
so am I. Just on Long Island, though. Little
Oh, nice.
across the pond. Um, well, thank you so much, Beth Ann, for joining me here. This is so exciting.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. And we could maybe reach out across the water almost, couldn't we? And connect.
Yeah, I'll try to,
My shore to yours.
when I go for a walk today, I'll manifest, sending energy towards Beth Ann and Brighton.
Do that.
Um, well, first I want to know, since we are going to talk about My Policeman mainly, I'm just curious if Graceland, you had seen the Elvis film that had just come out with Austin Butler.
Have I seen it,
Hmm.
or had I seen it before I wrote the novel?
Well, have you seen it after your
I have
novel?
seen it. Yes, I have seen it. It came out obviously after I'd written my novel, but I have seen it, and I absolutely love the first half.
Ah, I've
Yeah,
heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay,
I thought the first half
interesting.
was very good, and I thought that Austin Butler just does you know, the best Elvis impersonation I've ever seen. He's incredible. And I was expecting to hate it, obviously, because I am Elvis, having written a novel about Elvis. I feel like I've kind of, you know, spent a long time fantasizing about what it would be like to be him. So yeah, and obviously I've watched a lot of Elvis and read a lot about Elvis. So yeah, I thought that the first half was had so much energy, and I thought that it really caught that kind of very exciting, very daring, taboo busting, sexually charged Elvis
Mm.
really well, and in a way that had been kind of forgotten, because lots of people, when they think of Elvis, when I was telling people I was writing a novel about Elvis, they would say, oh, he died on the toilet. That's what people know about Elvis, younger people. Um, so I'm really glad that that movie has brought that other Elvis, into our vision. And I think it's great. I think that the second half kind of, a bit like Elvis's life, the second half is kind of more tricky in a lot of ways. And, and I think they did a good job, but I kind of wasn't as satisfied with it myself.
It sounds so similar. See, I need to see Elvis, but we've had here Elizabeth Winder, who is a Marilyn Monroe biographer, and I dissected the Blonde film with her. And Elvis and Marilyn, it's very similar in that
It's,
tightrope of film portrayal where um the beginning stages really Germany and the creativity is all there. But like my frustration with Marilyn and Elizabeth, I'll speak for her, but she said this on the podcast, um, that they never get her intellect right. Like they never show her film production company, her reading. It's always through the men. And I mean, I guess Elvis is a little different because of the gendered aspect.
yeah.
Um, but did you feel that way when you were writing that like your fictive account. Like it's fictive, but it's biographical, like Joyce Carol Oates's Blonde.
Yeah.
That it was tricky.
Oh
Like
yeah, I mean, it's so tricky. Um, it's so tricky, but in a way, you just kind of have to give yourself permission, to go with it and see what happens. I mean, I never thought I'd write a novel about Elvis. It just seems a preposterous thing to do to me now. Who did I think I was? I am not even American. It's ridiculous. But I always loved Elvis since I was little, and my mum's a massive Elvis fan, and once I started reading about him, I kind of couldn't leave it alone. And, once I kind of got a bit of a handle on the Elvis and his mum narrative, and, what that meant for him and what it meant for her when he became famous, that was kind of my way in. But for sure, I was really influenced, I guess, by Joyce Carol Oates's Blonde. I think that's a terrific novel, and it kind of showed me a way to do it, that it was okay to do this, and it was okay to kind of imagine yourself as that person that had existed, but also as, your own version of that person that had existed, and to kind of hold both of those things at once and somehow kind of run with it, that would be okay. So I just took a leap and did it, and loved it. I mean, what's not to like? Joy, and plus, my novel ends when Gladys dies. No spoilers, but so I didn't tackle the kind of, there were loads of seeds of stuff that happens later in Elvis's life, all there from a very early age, actually. So there's plenty of trouble, but it doesn't get as depressing, really, as the second half did, for sure.
well, and how sad about Priscilla and what happened to her with her death. And it was just like especially seeing her at an award show and then that next week
Lisa
she
Marie,
passes away.
I know, I was so shocked, really shocked. And yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about the family now, to be honest, but it just seems like the kind of legacy of that amount of fame is a very difficult thing that is still playing out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that sadness, but I will say, like, what now I'm telling you, I'm going to read Graceland. I'm going to post it on Instagram, and
Oh,
let you know
yeah.
when I finish. But it does make sense to me now, especially knowing your process through that, taking a historic, well, a music legend, and then really creating a fictive psychology around him and his encounters. It makes sense why E.M. Forster would have been like, so I didn't know about the E.M. Forster connection until I was reading My Policeman,
Uh-huh.
but I was like, this actually reminds me of E.M. Forster's Morris,
Yeah.
and his life, like a new updated a version that we'll get into, but um then when I realized you had based this whole triangulation of desire with our three leading characters, Marion, Tom, and Patrick, and saw it was based on E.M. Forster's own love
Yeah.
for a policeman, it
Yeah.
makes sense. Is that your process? Is you start from the real everyday experience and then you build your world?
Yeah, I mean, it's different with every novel. It's hard to say, to generalize, but I think that what happened was, well, I think what happened in every book actually up until My Policeman was I had started with a real story. So I started with some facts.
Hi, this is Andrew, and I'm interrupting what I know is an enthralling interview because I want you all to know that we are sponsored by Broadview Press. And if you don't know, Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher who publishes books covering topics like English studies, writing, philosophy, history, gender studies. And every season on the podcast, I interview one of the Broadview Press authors. So for the fall, we had Anne Stevens on to talk about literary theory and criticism. She played a Wizard of Oz literary game with us. She talked about why Bridgerton actually involves literary theory. So does 50 Shades of Grey. Who knew? And also, we just had on Jeffrey Weinstock, who wrote the first ever pop culture analysis book. So, I am all things a lover of pop culture, especially my Hollywood topics, Real Housewives, the list goes on and on. And he also wrote the book called The Mad Scientist's Guide to Composition, where he's writing a book teaching students about how to write rhetorical strategies, but it's all around this metaphor of being in the mad scientist laboratory. Because as you'll learn when you hear our episode with Jeffrey, he is a gothic and horror fanatic. And I mean that in all the best ways possible. So you don't want to miss Broadview Press's exclusive discount because you're listening to the podcast. All of you get an automatic 20% off. Use the code Ivory Tower for 20% off site-wide on all of their books. So in our show notes, we have a link to Broadview Press. Make sure you click the link, put in Ivory Tower, and you're going to get 20% off your order. So enjoy your reading, everyone.
And my second book was loosely based on the time that Peggy Guggenheim spent in West Sussex, because very little known, but she did actually live quite near here, where I am now, for a little while, and I thought that was very interesting that you had this kind of eccentric American millionairess living in a cottage in West Sussex, and she employed a local girl as a cook, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. So that's kind of where that second novel came from, and I'd really enjoyed that process of kind of having some sort of framework to work with, I suppose, and having lots of kind of jumping off points for your imagination. And trying to see, I suppose, where are those kind of gaps, silences, omissions, where the novelist can kind of jump in, and imagine it. When I was kind of looking around, I suppose, for another idea for a new novel, I was thinking about Forster, and I'd loved Forster for a really long time, and I actually got into Forster through the Merchant Ivory movies, because when I was growing up, they were on, on Channel 4, and I had a little kind of black and white portable telly back in the dark ages. And it was in my bedroom, and I used to, in my house, you didn't really watch that kind of movie, it was a bit highbrow. So I would watch them kind of on my own late at night in my bedroom, and it felt kind of a little bit sort of forbidden almost, although they're very sort of genteel. And I absolutely loved, the version of A Room with a View. I mean, it's got that kind of 80s excess, Helena Bonham Carter's hair is kind of out here, and the costumes are amazing, and the music is sumptuous and all of that. But also, I think I just loved the humor in it and the warmth in it. They were the things that I really responded to, and that took me to the novel, and then that took me to reading Forster. So I loved him for a long time, and I thought, well, I wonder if there's a novel there somewhere, in his life or whatever. So I started reading about Forster, and I kind of quickly realized actually that to take on, I mean, it has been done, to take on writing a novel about Forster himself would feel too big a project for me at that time. I didn't really feel that I was up to it, like I had the right to do it, I suppose. And I think writing about writers, especially, figures like Forster, it's just, an absolute minefield, and I didn't feel quite up to it. But what I kind of couldn't let go, I suppose, was the story of Forster and Bob Buckingham, who was a policeman who Forster met, I think, when he was in his 50s, and Bob was in his kind of early 30s. And Bob was about to be married to a woman called May Hockey, who was a nurse. And Bob and Morgan Forster, embarked on this long relationship, I think about 30 years. And, Bob was really the love of Forster's life, as far as we can know. But, Bob remained married throughout to May. And at the time when I was reading about this, Wendy Moffat's biography, great biography of Forster, hadn't come out. So it felt even more exciting, because it was like I was kind of like reading between the lines a little bit, because at the time the big biography was the P.N. Furbank Life of Forster, which is fantastic, but is kind of coy about, naming what's actually going on here. But there were these wonderful studio photographic portraits of Forster and Bob looking at one another, and you can just see, that the love there. And so, it's very clear in that book that relationship, was a kind of a deep love relationship, even though it never says that outright. So that was interesting to me. And even more interesting to me was that although May had a difficult relationship with Forster at the beginning, they kind of worked things out, and I mean, we're never going to know, how May really felt, or indeed how Forster really felt. But it seemed to be that they kind of negotiated the triangle, and May would have Bob some weekends, Forster would have him other weekends. And actually, at the end of Forster's life, when he'd had a stroke, he was nursed by May at her house, at the Buckingham's house in Coventry, which I kind of love because Coventry is a very sort of, mundane place compared to Cambridge, which is where we normally imagine Forster. And there he is in this kind of semi-detached house in Coventry, being nursed by May, his lover's wife, and she was apparently the one who's there holding his hand as he died. So that was the kind of image, I suppose, that really interested me. And I guess I wrote the book as a way of trying to explore how that comes about and how three people get to that point. Now, obviously, I made a very conscious decision that I was going to take this away from the source material. So I was going to give myself permission to make up these characters. Having said that, their roots are in those three people as far as I can understand them. Although, I changed a lot. So I changed the period, I changed the people and the story, and it became a much darker story, really, I guess. But yeah, I've forgotten now what your initial question was.
Well, no, no, that's it. It's, um, I'm just having a coffee with you, Bethan. We're just, chatting. And what I think is so fascinating is what really works in your novel, and then especially for the film adaptation of your novel, um, is the period, in my opinion, because as a 19th century queer male literary scholar, I dwell a lot on Whitman and Wilde, and I know a lot about the Bloomsbury group, Forster, Dominic. It'll come to me. Not. I was about to say another queer historian friend of mine. I was like, wait, he's not from the Bloomsbury group. Um, but Forster, Virginia Woolf, her sister. Um, and they're like what I always love with Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster is they're literally not only their queer experience, but they're literally straddling the Victorian to the modern period. And they've now been exposed to what homosexuality is. Like they've lived through or have heard about Oscar Wilde's trial. They know that there are people being convicted of sodomy, and there's undercover um, same-sex desire and acts because they're not allowed to be out in public, especially if they're lower class.
Mhm.
Um, so like what I find though is setting your novel in 1957 with the love triangulation, the desire, the queer male experience is really it's right before like 10 years before Stonewall. I mean, a little more than 10 years, but still right before LGBTQ rights and that whole um surge happens of having to be in public, like saying we need
Yeah.
rights so we can live in public. Like was that really key for you? Is it
Yes. I
has
mean,
to be here.
yes, it was key. I realized that I wanted it to be well, I wanted to write about the 50s from a personal point of view,
Mm.
because my parents grew up in the 50s. So I'm nosy, to imagine what that would have been like. And it's one of those things, it's a kind of twilight zone that I think is a really rich thing actually for a writer to kind of delve into, because you kind of I feel like I sort of know the 50s, I mean I was born in 1973, so obviously I don't, but I feel like I do because my parents grew up then, so I have a lot of their memories of it, and family photographs, um listening to the music, Elvis, listening to the music, watching films from them, and so on. So there was a kind of personal link for me. But also, of course, that period in Britain was a period when, there was basically a cruel and very focused witch hunt against gay men. And, I think the Home Secretary said something like, he wanted to rid Britain of this plague or something like that. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like that. And, there was a very kind of deliberate move to kind of wheedle out homosexual men from positions of power in government and in kind of powerful positions in society. And in fact, things became more oppressive here than they had been, during the war and between the wars. There was this kind of tightening up, of so-called morality. So I thought that was very interesting. So that's why there was a kind of surge in cases of them being imprisoned. And so yeah, setting the novel kind of 10 years before that law changed felt like that would be kind of the most, I suppose, sorry, but I am a novelist, the most dramatic
Mhm.
period when that particular triangle might play out, right? And also, I think I was interested in Brighton in the 50s, particularly. And I found this book, which is called Daring Hearts. And it's an oral history project that was done here in, I think, the early 90s. And it's just full of, so it says lesbian and gay lives of 50s and 60s Brighton. And once I'd got that, and I'd read the stories in there, that just kind of set me off thinking, okay, this is really, really rich material because it's full of the kind of joy actually of countercultural lives and and Brighton is a place where, for a long time it's been a kind of very different place in the UK. It's a place where you're allowed to break the rules. It's a place that's famous for so-called dirty weekends, and sexual license, and having a party, right? And it's kind of always been that way. But it's also, an English small town. And I just thought, well, I wonder what that was like in the 50s, when those kind of repressions were so apparent, and yet things were changing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and the book is it's full of joy and rebellion, and these lovely little details of queer life in the 50s and 60s here, and it's very specific. So it's got all those kind of crunchy little things that you need to write a novel, and lots of them end up in My Policeman. So, things like the Argyle Hotel where Patrick goes, and there's the Oriental boy on the piano playing Stormy Weather. That's directly lifted from Daring Hearts, from that whole history. So, yeah, that kind of cemented it, I think, when I read that.
Yeah, Brighton has always fascinated me, not only because it's a song in Sweeney Todd, which I think it is, by the sea, um, but we've had Jeremy Atherton Lynn here who lives in Brighton,
All right.
who wrote a book called Gay Bar,
Oh,
like
yeah,
during,
yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
so he's your neighbor maybe, but
No, but he
uh,
lives here actually.
yeah, and um, he talked about that queer freedom in a way that Brighton offered. And in a way, it reminds me of what we have here in America, which is Fire Island, which I know a lot of history about, even Atlantic City, with its casino lifestyle, racial integration, like always a little ahead of the time because of that escapism. So it is fascinating
Yeah,
how those shore towns function. Um, so I love the setting. I mean, when the film starts even, I couldn't believe how high the walls were of like what I don't know what you would call that, but whatever like the stairs that lead to the actual shore or the sea cliff.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yes, I've
Well,
never seen anything like that in my life of how high it is. I'm like, this is high.
yeah, yeah. Well, but you see that's along the coast
Mm,
in Peacehaven where they end up,
mm,
which
okay.
although it's only I don't know 3 miles away from central Brighton, 5 miles maybe, is incredibly different. So Brighton it is flat and you go pretty much down to the. Well, no, it's not completely flat. There are steps actually. There are steps, but not like that cliff in Peacehaven. Yeah, Peacehaven's a very strange place indeed. I
Well, I'll
took.
have to make a trip eventually. When I'm back in England, I want to see my friends in the north, my friends in the south.
Have you been
Um,
to Brighton? You haven't been.
no, I've only been to central London.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, a little different.
I'm to Brighton.
I've been in the Bloomsbury area. That's actually where I stayed,
Oh,
by the
nice.
British Library. So my
Yes, very
favorite,
nice.
very pretty.
We have Charleston Farmhouse very near to Brighton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where
Yeah, no.
hang on, Vanessa Bell lived.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's like I don't know, 15 miles away from here. I go there quite a lot just for a little walk and a cup of tea.
Oh,
It's
wow.
very, very
Okay.
nice.
So yes, there's the Bloomsbury culture lurking. But when I had William DeCanzio on, and before I hit record, Beth Ann was telling me that she's going to read Alec. Um, it was that same question that I had for him, which I would love for you to answer, Beth Ann, which is working with the desire, like working with the themes of longing, desire, um, a especially forbidden quotes in quotes. I mean, back then, a type of much more charged forbidden nature of queer male desire. How tough was that as a process of trying to get into that psyche of knowing, especially Patrick, really is invested in this relationship, but knowing in a way, kind of like Morris, that I'm saying Tom is more like Morris, um, has this need to separate or wants to turn to a different life. And it's so heartbreaking, that process, you know?
Yes, yeah. So how hard is it to get into that
Yeah,
mindset?
how difficult is that psyche?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think okay. So I mean, there are a couple of things, aren't there, to talk about?
Mm,
One is that I suppose forbidden desire is a big subject for all novels.
mm,
um, and, novels that I like, I suppose, tend to deal with it. I'm very interested in it personally. And so I guess in a way, you know, not very, it's not very difficult because, and I guess that also I guess my connection, personally, because as you can see, I'm not a gamer. um, I guess my sort of personal connection is through, just growing up as a woman in a working class uh, culture, where I guess I was always aware that the expression of desire um, was not welcomed, you know. And I suppose that I was very interested in Marion's Marion's own internal repression of her desires and her kind of shame about them, her deep shame about them, and how difficult they are for her to understand, and her misunderstanding of her own feelings, and how they had, that had a parallel, not the same, obviously, not the same,
Mhm.
because her desires aren't policed, literally policed in the same way. Um, but that there was some kind of parallel there with Patrick and with Tom.
LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? If so, the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. Have you been moved by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie, or what have you. In addition to the articles published in the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog as well as personal essays on its popular Here's My Story section. This allows people like you to share their own experiences with our readers. To learn more about submitting either to the print or the online edition of the GNLR, visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org and scroll down to the bottom of the page to find a link to their writer's guidelines. If you have any questions, email stephen.hemrick@glreview.org. The GNLR can't wait to see what you have to say. And remember that they're offering an exclusive code with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So when you subscribe to the magazine, you'll receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. So that's 7 issues instead of 6. Again, just visit theglreview.org and click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR for your free issue.
And I think that, for me, I always felt like, I suppose, as the, the expression of female desire for a man, sexual desire, wasn't as wasn't I didn't find somewhere, I suppose, in kind of women's writing, or women's films, that felt as kind of liberated and true as I did in queer writing, queer film. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes,
it's
yes.
kind of much more okay to kind of get into it in a gay novel than it is in a in a kind of feminist novel, say. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
and it's
so
mm,
so I suppose, from that point of view, it felt just kind of like a joy, because I am just sitting here imagining it. I don't have to live it. So I guess that was my kind of way in. I mean, having said that, I was very worried and still am worried about, who I am and whether I have the right to write this stuff, you know. I mean, on the one hand, I'm very kind of convinced by the idea that, fiction writers have, if they do their research properly and they
mhm,
earn the right through research, that they can go anywhere and, write anything. And, and I like that idea a great deal. And I think it's an important idea, because, what is fiction about if it's not
mhm,
about empathy and about walking around in somebody else's shoes? That's what it's about. But of course, on the other hand, I was aware when I was writing it that in lots of ways I don't have that right, to write this character of Patrick, because I'm not a gay man. Um, and I still kind of wrestle with it, and I don't know what the answer is. And I'm not sure if now I would write this novel. I mean, when I started writing it, it was about probably a good, so it came out 10 years ago, and I guess I started writing it about 13, 14 years ago, in actual fact. And, it feels like the conversation has kind of moved on.
yeah.
and that, rightly, there's a lot more emphasis now on own voices, which I think is really, really important. And so I don't know, I haven't kind of decided, but I was worried about it, and I remain worried about it.
Well, I wouldn't be worried about it. I'll be your press person, Bethan, um, because I find that what is so ingenious in your narrative, um, and we will talk about the film adaptation because I'm sure, um, it really launched these characters into the universe
Yeah.
visually. But it
Mm.
reminds me of Michael Cunningham's The Hours,
Yeah.
where,
Thank you.
right? I mean, if I was teaching your novel, I would teach it with The Hours, um, and maybe even Mary Renault's The Persian Boy, um, The Color Purple. Like I can even basically queer historical fiction. It's
Yeah.
and like what Michael Cunningham does so splendidly is it's not about Virginia Woolf. It's about how Mrs. Dalloway becomes this awakening novel. And like in a way, that's where I feel Patrick's art really becomes the way in for both Tom and Marion. But
Mm-hmm.
what you do so like I have to say to you, I was so struck and moved by Marion's conflicts because she is really not condemning. Well, I mean, we I don't want to spoil it for everyone who hasn't watched or read
Yeah.
Beth Ann's novel. I mean, she does, of course, pull the trigger on a decision.
Yeah.
Um, but she isn't outrightly condemning um homosexuality
Yeah.
or like she's trying to find the humanity. And I find how like the agency where she's trying to, like you've said it, she's trying to realize her own ambition and her agency, and she's stuck. But
Mm.
yet she also sees that Tom is stuck with his own desire. So it's like for her to process all of this, um, there's a lot of complicatedness with Marion. I really think that's
Mm.
what you've done so brilliantly, Beth Ann, is you've presented this tug of war, psychologically a tug of war. And I haven't seen that in a novel uh,
Oh,
since The Hours. I mean, everyone out there who's been on the podcast, I love your novels, but like that psychological depth is really not easy to present, and you do it so beautifully. We're going to be talking about My Policeman for a while. Like it is something that we're going to remember.
thank you, thank you. That really touches my heart because I love The Hours. And it was one of the novels that I read before writing My Policeman, and it is one of my all time favorites. And The Color Purple.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I suppose that's what I'm always trying to do. Is get into that kind of complexity of human relationships, really, and how it's never, it's always, that fiction is, one of my tutors said to me very early on, fiction is about, good people doing bad things, and that's kind of always what I'm interested in, I think. And that they're all good people doing bad things, aren't they? To a certain extent.
Yeah, well, and the queerness is flawed in like Patrick's intentions are questioned, Tom's intentions of marrying Marion, but being with being with Patrick at the same time is unethical,
Mm.
immoral in a way. But Marion also steps in it. So flawed characters are what I'm drawn to. I mean, I think like you said, that's our psychology. That's who we are as people.
Yeah.
Um, and but there's such well, let's get I need to ask you about the film, which is well, first, a shout out also to your audiobook performers because they are so well cast. Um,
Good.
yes.
Yeah.
And I loved how they portray the flashbacks. Like that you actually have Marion's voice and
Right.
you have Patrick's voice in their writing. And yeah, so moving. It's such a wonderful audiobook.
Oh, good, good, because I haven't really dared to listen to much of it.
I know a lot of writers never want to. There's only been a few, maybe two, who've listened to their full audiobook. So you're in a big class of writers who don't want to listen,
No,
which I could understand.
I'm sure they've done a good job. I just don't really want to listen to my own novel.
No,
I'd
no, it's
rather listen
wonderfully
to somebody
done.
else's.
But something that was so interesting of a difference
Mm,
with the film is we don't get time markers, right? I actually was waiting for, oh, okay, when is 1957 going to come on the full screen? When is 1999 going to come? And I
mm,
think for the film, it works with the mystery of ambiguity because people's faces change in the
mm.
same scene, right? We get Marion, her younger version, when it's actually her older version in the scene. And the
Yeah,
same goes for Tom and Patrick. So,
yeah.
like, cinematically, it's so beautifully done. But
It,
to ground us in your novel, like, the flashback is so important. And how did that begin for you as a literary device? Like, I need to jump back in time.
well, I think it was just always there because I knew that I wanted to explore this, this scene of the three of them together at the end, of Patrick's life, or Forster's life as it was, or apparently the end. So I knew that that was where I wanted to be, but I think I quickly kind of realized, okay, but the kind of the meat of the story of why they are here, happened a long time ago. So I'm going to need to have a dual time frame. And of course, what that does is, it kind of immediately gives you all sorts of possibilities as a novel, as a novelist, because you can um, compare and contrast those two times. And and the great thing about a novel is, unlike in a film where it's actually quite difficult to, as you say, to mark the passing of time. And I think they do it very well in the movie, because partly because they've kind of the casting is very good. um but in a novel, of course, you can just do it in the middle of a sentence. It's like, boom, there we are, we're back 100 years, boom, we're you can go wherever you want, and however you want to do it, as long as you take your reader with you. So that's a great freedom, isn't it? And yeah, and I enjoyed that. And and I liked the kind of thing of having those questions, I suppose, opened up, right at the beginning. Why have you taken this man, into your home? And what are these relationships about? And then kind of spinning back in order to mind them. And also I like the idea of the characters themselves, I suppose, having their own kind of moment of like, oh, okay, let me look, or Marion at least, let me look back at what I have done and reconsider, you reconsider my life, really.
Yeah. Well, how many um tell you that like both your novel and your film, I mean, I must have teared up at least. Well, the ending of the film, I think I cried
Yeah.
for a minute. That was one of the most it's both heartbreaking and liberating. It's so complicated. Again, I don't want to like say the ending, but it builds us up to kind of anticipate what Marion's going to do at the end and decide. Um, but there's just so much tension that happens in the ending, and especially to realize that the three of them haven't been in the same place for 40 years, like
Mm.
more than 40 years, is hard to fathom. And yeah, I mean, how many tell you that they are just the ending, they just are so it's such a complicated feeling that they're processing.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's always what I'm hoping for from
Yes.
endings, I suppose, that there are a lot of complicated feelings and that in a way, the end of one story is the start of another one. Um, yeah, I mean, I thought that the ending of the movie, I think actually is probably more successful than the ending of the novel in some ways, because it was more kind of purely emotional, I suppose. I found it very moving as well, that last short of the two of them, and then marrying who I'd say, but yeah, I thought they did that very well, and I thought that they, like you say, they managed that kind of difficult balancing act of hope and heartbreak
Mhm.
um really beautifully, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do feel like in your novel, what I love so much is that Marion has her say.
Mm.
Like we don't really get her outburst in the film the way
Uh,
we do in your novel. Like for your novel, I felt it was almost uh a doll's house, like Nora in a doll's house with Ibsen, like having that realization moment of, okay,
mm.
I'm slamming the door. Like I need to live my life.
Yeah.
Um, right in the film, we get that it doesn't have to be told to us, right? That's where the visual, she can look out at the sea and you understand the metaphor.
Yeah.
Um, in her eyes. Yes.
Yeah.
And that cast is so wonderfully cast. I mean, I don't think I mean, Rupert Everett, I've seen him on stage in the Oscar Wilde play that he
Me
was
too.
part of. Oh, it's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Harry Styles.
Yes.
I know Andrea, she's a big fan, but I am too. I thought he's so good at the 50s. I mean, Don't Worry, Darling. Uh,
Made, made for it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, which is fascinating because his concert appearance is so Gen Z and so full of eccentricity like Elton John. So it's interesting how he
Yeah.
plays the nostalgia.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Mm.
well, let me ask you, I wouldn't be a My Policeman interview without asking you, did you have a chance to meet the cast? I know someone else wrote the screenplay, but how
Mm.
involved were you with being consulted during the production?
Not very is the answer. I mean, however, so the producer, I'm sure was Robbie Rogers, who got in contact with me about, I don't know, about a year after the novel was published,
Oh, wow.
saying that that the novel meant a great deal to him personally. I think at the time he had just published his memoir about coming out, as a professional soccer player. Um, and we met, and I could just feel really, that the novel really had touched him, and that he was going to look after my story. You know? Because I could see how much it meant to him, and I could see that
Mhm.
he was passionate about it. So that was great, and so he was very good at keeping me in the loop about what was going on. But of course, when you sign over the option to your novel,
Mhm.
unless you're already hugely successful, and a name, you're not, you are handing the whole thing over. So I didn't have any kind of official say, in what happened. Um, but because Robbie is lovely and amazing, he did kind of keep me in the loop, and I met up with Ron Eisweiner, who wrote the script. He came over to Brighton, and I walked him around all the locations. And took him to Peacehaven, which, like you, he couldn't really believe existed. And just we just got on really well, and we just chatted for a couple of days. Basically, he came over to my house and he had dinner, and yeah,
Cool.
he was like, um, So I did see the script at quite an early stage, and was just really pleased that it seemed very true to the novel. That, I mean, I don't. I write scripts for radio, I write drama for radio, but I've never written a script for the screen. So it was, I didn't really know kind of how to read it. Do you know what I mean? I was kind of, and also I was just so amazed that it actually existed, to be honest, that it was quite
Mhm.
difficult for me to get any kind of critical distance on it. But I could see that they had kind of remained true to the feeling of the novel. Obviously, you lose a huge amount, don't you? Because, it's a film is 2 hours, and a novel is, however many hours it takes you to read a novel, so a lot more. So,
Yeah, yours is 11 hours.
yeah, exactly. There you go. Mine's 11 hours.
Mhm.
So, obviously a lot of things are going to be lost. But, I was, generally pleased with what was there. And then when they made the movie, I mean, I live just up the road from where they were shooting. I was invited down to the set, and I did meet some of the cast, including Harry,
That's
um,
exciting.
on the beach at New Haven on a very, very cold day. It was absolutely freezing on that. So it's that scene where he is teaching her to, no, he isn't teaching her to swim yet. So it's the scene where they first meet.
Oh, the flirtation,
Yeah,
right? With her
yeah. So
friend.
he's there in his shorts, and she's
Okay.
got her long skirt on, and it looks like it's a lovely day on the beach, and it was freezing, and I could see they were kind of blue with the cold, so there was no way they were getting in that water that day. Um, but yeah, so, and I mean, and everybody was just lovely and just really, really, really special thing to meet these, amazing actors who can just bring so much to any word that they say. It's really
Mhm.
quite incredible. I mean, Gina McKee is in, acting royalty, and so is Rupert Everett.
Mhm.
I didn't meet Rupert Everett. No, I did. I met him very briefly um, at the premiere in London, but I didn't meet him that day. And David Dawson, I just thought was absolutely fantastic as Patrick. I thought he really embodied it, and
He was
really,
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, he was incredible. So yeah, so it was amazing to go down there and just kind of, and it was a sort of out of body experience, to be honest. It was so bizarre to just crunch up that beach, and
Mhm.
the beach is quite steep like that, and you kind of go up the hill of pebbles, and then you get to the top, and then you can see, oh my god, there's Harry Styles and Emma Corrin, and they are Marion and Tom now, apparently, and they're speaking lines that are quite similar to the ones that I wrote. And it's just felt very, very weird, and kind of, I can't really describe to you how strange and thrilling, that is to see that.
Especially because you live right around the corner, basically.
I
That it
live right
manifested in this way. I mean, that's
I know, and it was
so
almost like,
moving.
yeah,
Mhm.
I could hear the Styles fans, screaming. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, they're just down the road.
Yeah. Well, I love his acting. I like him in Don't Worry, Darling. So yeah, Harry's gonna keep going, I think. We'll see. Will he enter the 1960s? I don't know. Or the
Yeah,
1970s. But
yes, 1960.
so I do want to Andrea has been sitting in on this, and I just want Andrea, to weigh in because I know she if you have a question, Andrea, or just to say to Bethan maybe how My Policeman has moved you, it's your time to shine.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, it's such an amazing novel, and I don't know why it took me so long to converse with Andrew about it. Because it's the perfect, it feels like the perfect fit for this kind of podcast that, we do here. My question would be, did you, when, you wrote it as a novel to be read as a novel, did you ever think that it could be adapted into a film? Or that even, and yes, because Harry Styles is in it and he has a big following, but that it would even become kind of as big as it was, like in all of these movie theaters with these huge premieres and that kind of thing.
Hey, Ivory Tower Boiler Room listeners and true crime friends. You've heard me gush over this incredible woman and her beautiful products. I'm talking about Mandy Made It. Mandy makes customized and original crochet and pre-cut goods. They are the perfect, unique, one-of-a-kind gift for literally anyone in your life. And she makes incredible home decor. I still have my pumpkins that I put out every fall. I just love them. Check her out on Instagram at MANDEE Made It, or search Mandy Made It on Facebook. To order, just slide into her DMs, and if you mention the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you will receive a free personalized gift with your first order. So, go on Instagram and look up at Mandy Made It, and Mandy is spelled MANDEE. Again, her handle is at Mandy Made It, Mandy spelled MANDEE, and order today.
No. Of course not. No. I mean, it's a weird thing, I think that, I mean, I've said this before somewhere else, but I'll say it again. When I first watched the movie, my main kind of emotion really was I just felt very exposed because, and uncomfortable, not because I didn't like it, but because it was like my kind of secret world that I'd just been pouring, into my notebook. Here's my notebook now. That's what I write in. And there's my little words, right? And in order to kind of allow myself to write these, fantasies that are novels, I kind of have to convince myself that I'm doing it in conditions of complete privacy, and it's like, although I hope someone will read it one day, obviously, reading is such a it's such a more, it's just a more intimate experience, isn't it, than the cinema, because it's the book is happening, it's unfolding within you, within your mind. It doesn't exist apart from in readers' minds, right? Whereas a film exists on a screen for all to see, and those characters are literally larger than life. So I kind of wanted to hide a little bit, it's like, oh my God, all my little fantasies are kind of being exposed up there. But of course, the other emotion is I want to run down the street screaming, my book got made into a movie. It's incredibly thrilling. And of course, I never imagined for 1 second, that it would get A, made into a film, and B, made into a film starring Harry Styles. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, right? That exists. I mean, what? So, and even when the option was bought, and and I met Robbie, and I could see he was very serious, and obviously his partner, Greg Berlanti, is a major kind of producer. Even then I just thought, well, it's not going to happen. I couldn't allow myself, I think, to think that might actually happen, because it seemed like too big a dream. My agent told me, well, about 1% of novels that get optioned actually make it to the screen, and I'm sure that's true. I mean, it's incredibly hard to raise the money, but of course, and indeed, it went on for 10 years, that whole kind of process, really, from option to screen, and it wasn't until I had that meeting, sort of 2 years before the film came out, with Robbie and with Michael Grandage, the director, and they informed me that Harry Styles had just left the building, and was interested in playing Tom. And then it was only then that I thought, oh, okay, maybe the film will get made, and then I did run down the street screaming.
Maybe that's your next novel, the Harry Styles fictive biography.
I know. Do you know what I sort of thought about the other day? I thought, oh, maybe I'll give him. Yeah, you never know.
I think he would be in it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll credit you, Andrew.
Okay, yes, please credit me. Oh, and the painter I was thinking of is Duncan Grant. And the reason from the Bloomsbury group I'm thinking of him is because I have his swimmers painting in my apartment, and it was giving me, when I saw the scene in Venice, I really found that classical homoerotic, almost Call Me by Your Name, and like I love those types of representations between men. But thank you, Andrea. I love that question.
Yeah,
and yes, and Bethan, it has been wonderful spending time with you, having this pleasure of your process. I'm gonna hold up my Policeman for everyone. We could do a whole discussion about the evocative cover. But
yes, I know. I rather like it, I have to say.
I do. I like it. And I love that it shows that it's free on Prime Video, which the film has gotten a lot of exposure. I love how widely available it is. And it's been wonderful. So everyone out there, please get your hands, get your ears, get your eyes, absorb my Policeman in every iteration. It's such a wonderful narrative, and I'm so thankful, Bethan, that you have come out with this novel and this story that really needed to be told in this complex way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to be here chatting. I've really enjoyed it.
I can't wait for everyone to listen. And yes, please let me know when you read Alec.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, definitely I will. I didn't even think about it. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, because
I'm fanning out that you listened to my interview, so I might have to shout you out more in interviews.
My research.
Yes, well, thank you for that. Everyone out there, please, let us all know Bethan is on Instagram. Uh, please send her love in messages, tag us in stories. And yeah, I can't wait to have you back again, Bethan, because I'm sure you have works in your mind that are in your black notebook that you will be sharing with the world soon.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Bethan.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Andrew Rimby, the executive director. I want you all to follow us on social media because there's so many video clips that we share and so many photos about these episodes. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Follow us on Twitter at Ivory Boiler Room. Follow our Facebook page, The Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Join our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. For $5 a month, you get ad-free episodes, our video interviews, the True Crime and Academia bonus episodes, and all Ivory Tower Boiler Room bonus episodes. Thanks for buying a coffee for me. And thanks to an amazing team. Thanks, Mary. She's our chief contributor. And thanks to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room spring interns, Andrea, Caitlin, Sarah, Sheila, and Rosie. See you all again in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.